All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started and let some folks trickle in as they come. First off, I want to welcome and thank you all for being here today. It's going to be a really great event. We've got a couple really good presentations for you, one by myself and then one from my colleague, Mary Parr from Michigan Natural Features Inventory. So those are going to be two great presentations for you. My name is Cody Selewski. I'm a land stewardship specialist here with the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. I've been here for about 5 years, going on 5 years. I've had a couple different roles, but I've stayed in stewardship the whole time. So doing a lot of on-the-ground work. My current position has me doing a lot of restoration work, forestry, and then, of course, prescribed fire, which is really exciting for me. So thank you for coming again. This is the Priority Landscape Learning Series, where it's going to become an annual event where we'll highlight conservation and stewardship practices as well as high priority land projects. This year we're highlighting the parcel in Kalkaska County, the Perch Lake Addition, the Upper Manistee Headwaters. It's a 342 acre addition we are currently still fundraising for. So this is our mission statement at the Conservancy, and one part of this I really wanted to highlight is the advancing stewardship, because that's what we're trying to do with utilizing prescribed fire. We've had 34 years of success. Since 1991 we've been doing this. Almost 50,000 acres of public and private land. About half of that is in easements, and the other half is in public lands as far as preserves and sanctuaries. 157 miles of shoreline protected, 126 miles of trail for public use, and we serve a 5-county service area: Benzie, Grand Traverse, Kalkaska, and Manistee counties. So what is prescribed fire? Prescribed fire, depending on how you look at it, there are varying definitions, but the very basic definition is the intentional setting of fire used to meet management objectives through a set of parameters, or a set of conditions that considers the safety of the public and fire staff, weather, and probability of meeting the burn objectives. Fire is a crucial natural part of Michigan's habitats. One of the most important parts of prescribed fire is that it can be used to replicate the natural processes of low to moderate intensity fires, so like wildfires, but it also is used to help improve and maintain healthy ecosystems. Kind of coming back on the importance of fire, certain ecosystems, especially here in northern Michigan, and most of you are probably familiar with jack pine forests, need periodic fire to remain balanced and healthy. It's a crucial process that flora and fauna have evolved with over thousands of years. So plants, animals, they've all evolved with this kind of regime of fire. Prescribed fire stimulates seed germination of native species, which provides cover, forage, and structure for ground species like grassland birds, wild turkeys, cottontails, and eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes. With the promotion of native species, fire also tends to suppress and kill non-native and invasive species. Species like spotted knapweed, garlic mustard, reed canary grass, and even autumn olive. The importance of fire can really not be understated. So this is a map looking at Michigan circa 1800, basically pre-settlement, what the habitat types would have looked like back then. And so you can notice on here on the little legend, we've got oak hickory forest, which is kind of this pinkish color. And you can kind of see the southern Michigan is kind of wrapped in a lot of this. We've got some pockets up here in the northern area. We've got pine oak forest, which is this orange color you're seeing. And so this is kind of where you're seeing the jack pine stands and kind of on the fringe of that habitat. And we also have savanna and grassland. Again, encumbers a lot of southern Michigan, southwest Michigan in particular, a lot of native prairies down there. And then we also have marsh and wet prairie, which is this kind of hard to distinguish from the oak hickory forest, but a little bit deeper purple that you're seeing there. But most people don't know that marsh and wet prairies, you wouldn't think that'd be something that could actually burn, but historically it actually ran through a lot of these other systems, as far as, oak hickory system right into a marsh or a wet prairie. And in a dry year, it would burn. So then it comes to invasive species control. This is one of the primary reasons why we are utilizing prescribed fire. Most of the invasive species we have here in Michigan are not fire tolerant, so they don't do well when we light fire. Fire can be used to keep back and even kill while increasing native plant populations. Some species that you might be familiar with or heard of, we deal with a lot. Up here on the upper right-hand corner, this is reed canary grass. We've got a fire crew working along a boardwalk here. This is not our picture, by the way. But you can see the black behind them. So this looks like a dormant season burn. So sometime in the winter, late fall, or early spring, when the thatch is built up and dry, it really helps them get rid of it, and then it leaves this black soil, which you'll learn later is really helpful in promoting native species and early warming in the sun. Down in this left-hand corner, we have smooth brome grass, which you have probably seen but not noticed necessarily on roadsides in fallow fields. It's a very common grass. You can mow it and it looks just like a lawn. We have a ton of it here, being an old golf course. So that's what we're dealing with right now. It greens up and looks great in the summer, and it creates this monoculture, really thick and really hard for anything to move through it. And then it lays down in the dormant season. Creates these really thick mats, sometimes even 12 inches in depth, that just nothing else will grow if you get rid of that thatch. And then this is another common one we deal with. We have some on the preserve here. This is autumn olive, which is a really difficult plant to get rid of. It has a weird tendency to not necessarily, it doesn't have a negative relationship with fire. It's basically tolerable to fire, but with repetitive fire regimens, it can be controlled. Fire adapted ecosystems. So some of the many species who rely on fire to maintain their ecosystems are some that you might know of. The Kirkland's warbler up here in the top left corner. They love young jack pine forests, 5 to 15 years in age, very specific. They have serotinous cones, and they require heat from the fire to release the seeds to regenerate. Down the lower left-hand corner, we have the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, a species that's pretty hard to find, even though I try to look for them every year. They're federally threatened. They need vegetation control. Surrounding wetland habitats is where they're usually found, and it helps overcrowding invasive species while providing the habitat and proper structure they need for prey and for nesting. And then you have the eastern wild turkey. Everyone knows this one. This is actually following a fire. I'm not sure if it was a prescribed fire or a wildfire, but it's not uncommon to see them walking through the smoke and, looking for bugs and whatnot. Pretty easy to get around. Most commonly, they choose nesting sites that are 2 to 3 years post-burn because of all the new regrowth, vegetation, the insects, the diverse structure. And then there's forage for young poults, so young turkeys. This is a photo from a prescribed burn I was on last year in southwest Michigan, near Kalamazoo. Excuse me. This was at Fort Custer Training Center. This was a prairie burn that they burn quite often. It's actually their driving range for the military, so they like to keep it kind of cleaned up. But it's actually a really good nesting site for eastern box turtles, which you can see here. That before the burn went off that day, we were noted that there were going to be federally vulnerable species in there, and so we took that in mind and we did a monitoring protocol. And as we ignited that burn, we saw this was one of 7 we saw escaping the unit that day. One of the species that, again, evolved with fire, and they know what to do when they see smoke or can sense it coming. So pretty cool. So this is another photo from southwest Michigan, but this is a sundial lupin, if you're familiar. It's one of the host plants for the Carner blue butterfly, which we unfortunately do not have up here. It's a little bit out of our range, but very popular down south. So fire can stimulate the growth of native species. The blackened soil warms the quickest, as you noted maybe from that reed canary grass burn, the picture that I showed you there. Pretty black, so you can imagine if you burned early in the spring, sun's going to really warm that soil before it warms anything around it. and then really promote those native species. The deep and extensive root systems of native warm season grasses, including little bluestem, switchgrass, rough fescue, store nutrients really deep in the soil. So sometimes the root systems are 10, 12, even 14 feet deep, which allows them to really survive those prescribed fires or wildfires even, being pyrophytic species or fire-loving species. So I've got a few slides here, and I'll kind of cruise through them a little bit, but this is a study from Auburn, A&M, and Alabama universities looking at longleaf pine. This is not a habitat or ecosystem that we have up in northern Michigan, or in Michigan at all, but it's looking at the seasonal timing and frequency of prescribed fire, and it kind of notes kind of the different changes that you have during different times of year and different frequencies of timing. So 2 year, we'll look at 2 years, 3 years, and so on. So this is the 2 years. This is the dormant season. Again, that's in the winter, fall, or late spring, depending on where you are. Down there, it's typically probably January, December, January, February. And so every 2 years, they did a prescribed burn here. You notice hardwood saplings. So you're seeing some of these saplings start to grow up. You've got your longleaf pines growing. And there's a little bit of shade in here, so a little bit more shade. And then we'll move on to the growing season. So this is, again, every 2 years. And we're looking at the lack of hardwood stems. So during the growing season, typically you're going to get a lot more top kill on those plants, on those lower level understory plants, because all of their energy is shot up to they're putting it out to the leaves. So it's going to kill them, or more likely to kill them. And you're seeing more native grasses and forbs in here as well on the understory, because you're getting the top kill on some of those hardwood stems. And then this is 3 years, dormant season, large hardwood stems, such as, in this case, water maple and red maple. And then the understory of wooded shrubs. So that just that 1 year difference between the 2 year dormant season and the 3 year dormant season, you can see a huge difference in the undergrowth and the red maples coming up. And this is 3 years growing season. So again, you're seeing a lack of, what did I do here? Went forward, sorry. The lack of hardwood stems in the mid-story. So you're getting the undergrowth, but you're not getting a lot of this mid-story here. You get a lot of these trees are starting to shoot up, and so and then we hit 5 years. So 5 years, again, a dormant season burn, so December through February, and you're seeing no native grasses or forbs. There was basically allowing those hardwood stems to get much taller, grow, give them time. We're not getting any kill from them from the low intensity fires, and of course these longleaf pines are still growing very well. But you're getting a lot more shade in this area, right? And the understory is not getting a whole lot of sunlight, so you're not seeing a lot of the grasses and forbs. And then this is 5 years growing season. You're starting to see even more lack of sunlight. There's an island of unburned vegetation, so as you run low-intensity fires through these systems, there's going to be patches where the fuel is too saturated and it's just not going to burn. And this was, they had this photo really small when I copied it on here, so sorry about the blurriness. But this is 30 years unburned. This is something you might even see in northern Michigan. It looks just like this, right? The longleaf is being outcompeted by some of the hardwood trees, which is not something you typically want in this system. There's complete lack of sunlight, nothing growing on the forest floor here, like pretty much barren. And then the longleaf regeneration is basically impossible. And then on to nutrient cycling. So this was actually a photo from Southwest Michigan last year. We did a site visit on a DNR burn unit. I believe it was about 60 acres of oak pine mixed forest. But again, you can note the blackened soil. There's not a whole lot of thatch left here, right? There's nothing left on this soil, but what it does is, this was a May burn. This was, I think, 3 days after post-burn. And a week after this, I don't have a photo, but it looked much different. It was pretty amazing to see the difference between the blackened soil and what was burned here versus what was outside the control line. It also increases the bioavailability of elements and other nutrients through occasional cycling. And the heat releases organic nitrogen through the combustion of organic materials. So then again, yes, improving the usable nitrogen and phosphorus for native species. And then water quality, of course. We can't skip out on water quality because obviously we all love water up here, and we know how important it is. Burning, so we burn to maintain and improve habitat. Through that, it increases forest and ecosystem health, and in turn, healthy ecosystems equals high water quality. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the how and kind of what we're doing here at Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy as far as a prescribed burn program. So planning an RX burn normally begins a year prior. It's something that we plan very well and ahead of time. And permits for conducting burns depend on the location of the burn site. So here in Traverse City, as many of you know, we have burned a unit here, a small unit, 1 acre. That was last March, and we're hoping to do more. We have a couple more planned. But the permitting is, as you would imagine, for trying to burn within Grand Traverse County. Being so close to the airport, being so close to schools, we have to think about all of these things. So the time of year also changes burn objectives. Fall, we normally have a higher drought code, meaning the ground, including the duff layer, is drier compared to spring burns. So you're burning deeper into the root system. You're not just getting that top layer. As an example, we're required to get a blanket permit from the DNR, as they are the fire authority in northern Michigan, as well as a burn permit from Grand Traverse Metro Fire Department, which is the local fire department. And then we also have to alert Cherry Capital Airport because we are right in their flight path. So that's something that the smoke might interfere with, and they have the ability to shut us down anytime. And then we also alert the local dispatch. So if we get any calls, people calling because there's smoke or burning, they know, the local fire department knows, dispatch knows that they can tell them it's just a prescribed fire. And then we have to set objectives. So can we meet our objectives and our goals today? And how are we going to go about doing so? Our burn plan includes thresholds and parameters on a go, no-go format. And do we have enough staff? Do we know the site plan? There's all of these things that go into this prep work that really takes a long time and a lot of thought and planning. So if everything lines up, then we can go ahead and meet our goals and we can burn. So the weather window is probably the single most important factor when planning a prescribed fire. If you don't have the correct weather, you don't burn. And as we know, in northern Michigan, weather can change pretty drastically day to day, which can be really frustrating at times. Certain wind speeds and directions are chosen depending on the site conditions and burn objectives. That's, again, something we think about here when we're burning. A moderate surface wind, say 10 miles per hour, can move a backing fire quick enough and give it good residence time to consume all of the fuels. That's ideal in our situation. So burning back into the wind is the idea. You're getting high residence time, which means that the fire is burning very slowly into the wind. So it's consuming all of those fuels, right? Too high of an RH can make it really difficult for the fire to stay lit and carry, which may be pretty obvious. And then too low, and it could present hazards like spotting. This is why we have parameters in our burn plan. While I won't go into too much depth on atmospheric stability, it's incredibly important when it comes to smoke management and dispersion, which is something, again, we have to think about a lot because we don't want to be smoking out our neighbors. Which we use actually a smoke management tool called V-Smoke. It's a modeling tool, that we use, and we can plot the smoke map, which helps us kind of identify how far it's going to go. Is it going to go all the way to East Bay? Is it going to go all the way down to Kingsley? Not likely the case, but it helps us figure that out. So besides weather, we also need to keep in mind the factors of ignition. Fuels are broken down into different categories that help us better understand the fire effects or what they will likely do. Even though there is no certainty, there is predictability. So fuel type, O1A is an example, is what we have here. So if you look out past the boardwalk there, you can see some matted grass. That's what O1A is spring and usually fall standing matted grass. And so we also look at the size and shape, the compactness, vertical and horizontal continuity, and the chemical content. These are all things that we have to think of when we're burning, because burning a slash pile is much different than burning dead grass, as you could all imagine. This is an example of, excuse me, the next burn we actually have planned. This is a burn map that's included in our burn plan that we create beforehand, and this is what the same map that we give everyone who's working the line. It's a very simple map, and that's kind of it's intended to be that way so that it's easy to read. You understand, it's very functional. It's 3.5 acres. The fuel type's on there. We've got a 5-foot mode control line. We've got water tank stage here. People know where water is. We've got the public viewing area, so we know where people are going to be staged. And then we've got any kind of hazards. Solar panels aren't necessarily hazards, but it's something to note that they're pretty expensive and we don't want to damage those. And so yeah, it's really functional and really basic. We've got A, B, and C here as far as points go, so you can tell someone exactly where you are. I also use this grid system that helps you if on a bigger unit, it would be more useful, but you could totally tell someone exactly where you are pinpointing on this grid system here. And so we're on to the Mitchell Creek Meadows burns. I talked about it a little bit before, but the idea with these burns is to remove all of the smooth brome grass that I talked about earlier, that invasive non-native grass that we really need to get out before we can do any kind of planting. So as you can see here, I'll continue to talk about it a little bit, but it creates these giant mats and just nothing comes out of these except for smooth brome, right? So we can't overseed this. We can't plant plugs in it. The only thing you could basically do is plant trees, but what we want this to be is kind of a mix between a dry mesic and a mesic sand prairie. That's kind of the end goal for this site because of the soils. And so this is May 7th, 2022. This was 2 years before we did the burn. And thank you, Rick Kane, for getting these photos. I appreciate it. So you can kind of see here, again, that matted grass. You got some milkweed coming up in here, a few native species, but then there's also autumn olive growing in here, some honeysuckle. It looks pretty bad. Nothing's growing up except for that grass. And then we move on. This is another photo from May 7th, 2022. Again, just kind of looking at that dense grass. It's pretty bad. This was March 3rd, 2024. We were burning in March last year, which is crazy because we still had snow on the ground this year. Last spring was pretty crazy. But yeah, so the burn went off without a hitch. It was great. It took about 45 minutes, I think, from the start of ignition. Maybe not even that. Pretty quick fire. But yeah. So this was the day after, immediately the day after. So the unit was still a little bit wet. This unit is always a little bit wet, in the middle here especially. But we had really good black up here. This was pretty good. I would say this unit is 50% black. It's kind of hard to tell from this photo, but that's 50% black is like 50% burned, right? We want that really dark stuff gone, fully consumed, if you will. Solar panels are still standing, yeah, that's right. I still have a job. I wouldn't be here if those were burned up. So again, this is the day after. You're seeing we did have some pre-treated autumn olive in here that some volunteers helped out with, which is great. But that was laying on, and we were hoping that it was going to burn up, but it really didn't. It was a pretty low intensity fire, small flames, a lot of smoke. And then this is 1 month after the burn, and so what you can see here is you're starting to see some green up. But what you can really notice is the green up compared to what's outside the unit. So this is basically the same stuff over here that was out of the unit. It's still just covered in that thick mat, and you can see the ground here, right? You can see all that soil, and that's what we really need. This is 2 months after, May 10th, 2024, and you're starting to see some really good stuff coming up. Again, just noticing that mat is just gone, right? Like there's still a little bit of thatch here and there, but the plants are now. We've reseeded this at by this time, and then we continued to plant plugs after this. But you're seeing that available soil. And this is August 21st, 5 months prior. So it's starting to look really good. We still have some invasives in there that we're working with. Queen Anne's lace and some autumn olive that's still going to come up, but for the most part, it's looking really good. We've got a ton of milkweed, which you'll see, I think, here. It's hard to see in this photo, but this is like all milkweed over here. It's looking pretty great. And then in the next photo here, I think you can see a little bit better. Yeah, so tons of milkweed coming up, and again, we did have some native forbs coming up in the spring that after we planted plugs from the greenhouse, which is really great. And this is kind of the end goal. This is what we're hoping it will look like after 2 to 3 years. It's kind of that dry mesic, sand prairie kind of deal. It's just a weird soil mix over there. So we're trying to be somewhere in between, seeing what works. But yeah, benefiting pollinators and native flora and fauna. So we're going to move into some of the deciding factors on why we're trying to do prescribed fire. So we're currently working on mapping and delineating our habitats and incorporating fire-dependent ecosystems in our management plans. This gives us the opportunity to understand the overall structure of the property and its potential need for fire and restoration. So historically, fires bled across varying habitats, and we'd ideally like to do some of that where appropriate, like I talked about earlier. Control lines would be constructed with this in mind. So kind of bleeding dry northern forests into a fen, dry sand prairies into an understory burn, and pine oak barrens, kind of bleeding those habitat types together with prescribed fire. And then I just want to touch a little bit on the Northern Michigan Fire Collaborative. So this is it's an effort that arose out of the realization that we need to get more prescribed fire on the ground. It's a cohort of varying individuals from other organizations, other NGOs, nonprofits, some federal and state organizations, a lot of tribes. And it's kind of like our formula for success. We can't do it alone. We can't start a burn program by ourselves and expect to have the capacity and resources together to get things going. It's something that we're trying to do, but we need the capacity. That's the issue, right? We can't have everyone on staff be certified to prescribe burn and then leave no one in the office. So we're working together. We're working on providing trainings, building a cache, and increasing fire literacy within the community. That's kind of what we're doing today, right? And so there's just a couple of photos that I wanted to follow up with. So this is another, this is a pine oak oak savanna burn that I was on last year. And this shows some of the members of the Northern Michigan Fire Collaborative here. And there's many more. There's people still signing on. So it's pretty great, pretty exciting stuff. This is a pump and roll exercise is what it's called. So you can use this to run wet lines around your fire beforehand, pre-treating the area. And so yeah, you basically are having a few people here, and then you're basically rolling an apple down the road, practicing that hose control. This is the pre-ignition briefing. Maps. We're going over maps, safety, weather. Again, this was the same unit that box turtle was in. So we went over any endangered species or kind of species to note or to look out for. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about Upper Manistee Headwaters, the Perch Lake Addition. So Upper Manistee Headwaters, the Perch Lake Addition, the Perch Lake Addition to Upper Manistee Headwaters, I should say, is a 342 acre parcel just to the west of Upper Manistee Headwaters, which many of you may be familiar with, but it's a pretty important addition. It's dry mesic northern forest, so it's got a lot of white pines, red pines. It's got that understory, a lot of native forbs growing in there. It's really important. There's a whole lake in there, right here, Perch Lake. But the like I said earlier, the dry mesic northern forest historically originated from catastrophic wildfire, but today it is currently maintained through low to moderate intensity burns, so it needs that fire to really stay healthy. Yeah, and then there's 10 wetland habitat types on this property, which is kind of crazy for 342 acres. Yeah. and it's a tier 1 parcel. So we use the Nature Conservancy's resilient and connected network data scaled down to our service area to look at the different tiers, and we kind of break them down into basically importance or significance, and it works really well. And so this parcel is a tier 1 parcel. So this is top 1% of all the parcels, 117 properties, literally the best of the best. It's super important for protecting water quality and increasing that contiguous high quality habitat and protecting diversity. And I just wanted to leave you with this this quote. I actually saw this at another presentation a couple years ago, and I really loved it. But this is a quote from Aldo Leopold, and this is him doing a prescribed fire on in Madison, Wisconsin, at the UW Arboretum. So yeah, thank you. Next, we're gonna have Mary Parr come up here and give the second part of the presentation for you. She's currently and recently just got a job at MNFI, Michigan Natural Features Inventory, but I will let her do the introduction herself.
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Buju, Mishkwa, Benishikwe, Indigenous Cause, Wabsheshi, Indodem, Bawatang, Indojabar. So what I said was a Anishinaabe traditional welcome. So I said my name. I'm part of the Pine Martin clan, and I'm from the place of the Rapids, or Grand Rapids. So I came up today. I'm sorry I was a little late, but I'm here now. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about restoring balance, Anishinaabe fire knowledge, guiding future management. And so a little bit about the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, where I'm a fire ecologist. I just started a couple months ago, so this is actually one of the first presentations I'm giving representing them, so that's exciting. But the Michigan Natural Features Inventory is our state heritage program. So every state in the United States, Canada, Mexico, they have natural heritage programs where we document and monitor rare and endangered organisms along with natural communities. And so our natural heritage program in Michigan is housed in Michigan State University Extension. And so their mission is to kind of connect residents and people living in the state with guidance, with knowledge, to kind of help solve local problems. So we service outside of MSU Extension. And a little bit more about my background. So I'm from Grand Rapids, from southern Michigan. I started working in the field in grasslands. I was a pyro from the beginning. I just love fire. And so I worked throughout the Great Plains in Minnesota, Nebraska, burning stuff, burning these natural communities. And then I came back to Michigan, and I was a land manager at a nature center in southern Michigan for about 4 years, where one of the highlights of my job was leading their fire program. And also teaching a lot of undergraduate students how to use fire. And then while I was working, I went back to school for a fire ecology project, and I just graduated with that in December. So lots of stuff going on. Yeah. So my presentation is going to kind of focus on some of the Anishinaabe fire teachings and kind of get you guys familiar with some of the stories that we have. I'm going to talk a bit about cultural fire ecology and why fire was used by Indigenous people, a little bit about fire suppression and why we're starting to see some of these changes, and then I'm going to touch on a few different Michigan Natural Features Inventory projects in your area that we're working on related to fire. So first, I do want to acknowledge that in this Traverse City area, we are on the lands of the Anishinaabe, or the Ottawa are kind of the primary people still dwelling here. The head of the bay is also known as Wawekwetong. And so the Anishinaabe, along with a lot of other indigenous tribes throughout the globe, use fire. And so our landscape has been shaped with fire. for thousands of years. And so in the absence of those cultural burns, we've seen a lot of negative changes, a lot of biodiversity loss, and a lot of catastrophic wildfires. And so fire, who I'm going to introduce you to, that Cody's been talking about, Ishkode, is the Anishinaabe word for fire. It has a lot of different translations and meanings. So the heart of the earth is one of the meanings. The mechanism that makes things new again is also another one. And so Ishkode is a powerful spiritual being. It is one of our main conduits from earth side to spirit side. It's one of the ways that we communicate with Creator and communicate with past relatives. And so it's often a focal point in a lot of different ceremonies, like birthing and naming ceremonies and funerals. And so the stories of the origins of fire kind of go back to Crow, or Ondeg. And so Crow is the one that changes in the light. So if you've ever seen crows in the light, you can kind of see these iridescent feathers. And so Crow used to be a very colorful organism. And so he noticed that the Anishinaabe were cold and suffering during a lot of our long, cold winters. And so he went to Creator and told him about this, and Creator gave him a branch with fire on it. And so Crow brought this fire back to the Anishinaabe people, and as he was flying back with it, the fire kind of scalded a lot of his beautiful feathers and turned him black. And so this was Crow's sacrifice for the Anishinaabe so that we could be warm and use fire. And so Crow gave a message when he delivered this, which was if the people ignored or disrespected this gift of fire, that it would leave or worse, become harmful to us. And so this kind of recognizes our sense of responsibility to use fire, to recognize fire, and to not ignore it because otherwise it may become destructive. So another important story related to Anishinaabeg history and fire is our migration. So a lot of you may not know, but the Anishinaabe used to dwell on the eastern coast of the United States from Maryland up to Canada until about 100 or 1000 AD. And so during this time, a lot of the tribal chiefs in the area, they received visions and prophecies. And so they all collected together and spoke about it with each other. And so it's called the Seven Fires Prophecy. And so this prophecy basically said that a different race would come, that there would be a lot of new knowledge and new tools, but there would also be a lot of hardship and destruction, and that if they wanted to preserve their culture, they needed to move west. And so this prophecy also said that this migration will start and end at a turtle-shaped island, and that they would know that they reached the place when they found food that grew on water, which we know today is wild rice. And so a lot of them decided to make the migration, and they started, up along this eastern coast. They followed the St. Lawrence Seaway down. There were a lot of very notable stopping places and visions that they received at those times. And so by the time that they got all the way down to Detroit and St. Lawrence, or by the St. Clair area, it had been almost 100 years. A lot of people had been born and a lot of people had died. And so at this point in the migration, there were kind of three groups that started to establish. So of the first group was the oldest brother, the Ojibwe. They were the ones that were the keepers of the faith, and they carried these scrolls with them and kind of were the keepers of these traditional practices. The Ottawa were a secondary group, the second fire or second brother, that kind of developed and were the primary people trading and acquiring provisions as they were making this migration. And then the third group that differentiated was the Potawatomi or Potawatomi. And so they are the keepers of the fire. And so they are the fire keepers that are maintaining these ceremonial fires used in these really important events. And so the story is that they carried these coals through the entire migration. And so in Michigan, these are the 13 different federally recognized tribes. And you can see the 3 fires are there and kind of united under the Anishinaabe name. So that's how we're all connected. And so they did find their final place. It is kind of in this area near Fond du Lac at Point 6. So Madeline Island is the turtle-shaped island that they found, and the presence of wild rice. But as they're migrating, let's see if I can use the pointer. Oops. Top button, okay. So as they were moving through Michigan, there's a lot of these areas. Arrows don't represent it truly, but there's a lot of migration up into the Upper Peninsula. They came down through Chicago. So the Ottawa started to focus kind of in this area. The Potawatomi settled in these areas. And then the Ojibwe kind of settled this entire area of Canada into Minnesota and also Wisconsin. And so getting a little bit more into fire and fire ecology and why was it used on the landscape. So the Ishkode Watomi are the land fire keepers, similar to Potawatomi. And so fire is an ancestral practice that was passed down from one generation to the next. And it was refined through practice. So they were taking note of how things were burning, what fire gave them the product they needed, what didn't, and they modified it over time to create this very fine-tuned application of fire. And these events were often community events. You know, you had elders there teaching the young adults and the children. So fire was something that they weren't afraid of. And often there was some ceremony involved. Some groups used smudging and drumming to kind of prepare the space that they're going to be burning. And also to smudge and protect themselves and the tools that they're using before conducting a burn. And so we know that fire is important to these systems. Cody gave a ton of great information about this, but just to review it a little bit. So as our systems are growing from year to year, all the plants that are growing are kind of piling up. And as they pile up, they form this thick blanket that kind of covers the earth, like Cody was talking about the smooth brome. And so all of that material is holding these nutrients. And so it's not available to the plants, it's kind of just suspended in that space. And so by burning it, you're burning down all those nutrients into a plant usable form that soaks into the earth and is usable by those plant roots. It's also creating this black ash on top of the soil, and that's attracting a lot of sunlight and warmth. And so it's warming and kind of stimulating those plants that had their tops burned. And it's also helping all these new seeds that are in the bank germinate. And so the combination of that really invigorates the system. And so fire is maintaining the composition of plants that are present, the ones that love fire. And it's influencing the structure of the trees and how the community functions. And so all of these plants that live in these systems have adapted over time these skill sets to be stimulated by fire. So their bodies and where they grow and the points that they grow from, they've adapted, you know, a lot of prairie plants. Their points of growth are just under the soil surface. And then they have really deep root systems to respond. And then also the timing of their biological processes of when they produce flowers, when they produce seeds. And so they modify that to fit in with this fire that's applied. And so Indigenous people have been using fire for a long time. And I'm going to go through a list of some of the reasons they would use it and why. So community cleanup was a huge use of fire. So you can imagine if you're living in a space, it's a lot easier to move around when there's a lot less brush and debris. So they would use it to tidy up those spaces that they're living in, and also for fireproofing in case there was wildfire or fire events nearby. They also used it to reduce pest control, so to reduce some insects or biting flies in the area or rodents that were kind of running around. And so another reason they used fire was for travel. So you can imagine these Anishinaabe groups are kind of migratory. and nomadic. They're moving to doing ricing in the late summer. They're going to the sugar bush in February. They're visiting other groups throughout the year. And so they're moving across the landscape a lot. And so it's a lot easier to move when there's not a lot of brush and debris that hinders your movement. And so this is one of my favorite pictures of the old indigenous trails throughout Michigan. And so this is just another image of, being able to move across the landscape with more ease. It was also helpful for seeing some of the neighboring bands approaching from afar, from seeing maybe enemies coming from afar. Also food, like bison and elk and other things they're hunting, they could see it at long distances. And also any predators that might have been in the area. And so this happens in forested communities too. So this is a system that has seen fire, and you can see all the branches are kind of higher up. There's not a lot of brush down low, and so this made it much easier to move through these systems. So fire is also very helpful in berry production. So I don't know what it is about berries, but they love fire and they love disturbances. So blueberries, huckleberries, raspberries, strawberries, cranberries, a lot of them are very stimulated following a fire. And to zone in on blueberries, since you guys do have a lot of blueberries in this area, blueberries especially bolster after fire. So fire will come through and burn some of the tops of the plants. It'll burn up any diseased branches or extra things that are suspended. It restores all those nutrients, and then the plants sucker like crazy and spread out. And then that first couple years after a fire, the plants are very productive and produce a ton of berries. And so they're feeding everybody. They're feeding the wildlife, they're feeding people. And when they're done, when some of the blueberries fall to the ground and don't get eaten, they have a perfect nutrient-rich bed to germinate and grow. So fire was also used to, in a way, rotationally graze a lot of different grazers like bison, elk, and deer. So you can see by this image that this is an area that was burned where it's nice and green, and then this is all the unburned area. And so kind of as Cody was talking about, when you burn early in the spring, it kind of elongates this growth period for the grass. It's able to get up and get sunlight and get nutrients. It's also really tender and nutritious, and the animals know that it's more nutritious, and so they will focus in on these areas and return to them all season long, which makes hunting a lot more predictable. Instead of going out into these large swaths of area, they know where the animals are likely to congregate because of their fires. Oops. And so fire was also used for agriculture, for stimulating a lot of edible foods, and then also for kind of land clearing for traditional kind of corn, rice, and beans. So this kind of helped clear the land so they could spread seeds, help stimulate those plants to grow. Here's a picture of, this I think was taken in Minnesota. You can see all the corn braided behind him. And it's still happening today. So people are still doing this and using this for agriculture. And then another thing was generating a lot of materials for different tools and things they're making. So some shrubs, after they're burned, they also kind of sucker and put out these long, straight stems that are really useful for making different items. And so without having those long stems, you really can't use a lot of these materials to make different items. And also, fire was used to generate and tend a lot of sacred medicinal plants. So, these natural areas were the original pharmacy. And so taking care of those medicines and making sure those medicines are healthy and nutritious also directly impacts you and your healing in your body. And so a lot of these cultural practices began to change following colonization. So that was kind of the first disruption of cultural practices. The first wave to kind of come through was disease, smallpox, tuberculosis, measles, and some of the high estimates are 90 to 95% of the populations were wiped out. Then there were a lot of wars. There was a lot of European settlement that displaced a lot of indigenous communities. And ultimately, a lot of fire was outlawed. Specifically for indigenous people, it was a $500 fine, which today would be about $1,500. So you can imagine if you're trying to take care of your family, this is a really big issue that would prevent you from burning if people are relying on you. And so farther beyond this fire suppression that occurred, there's probably about 100 years of it. There's a lot of timber removal, and a lot of the timber operations would slash the crowns off of the trees and lay a lot of the brush that wasn't going to be sold. And so it generated a lot of these really catastrophic fires in the 1800s into the 1900s. So this area is in Wisconsin, kind of by the Pinky. And so this was a big fire that rolled through a lot of different communities and was very catastrophic. There's rumors that some of the embers from this fire actually came down through the atmosphere into Chicago and started the Chicago fires. And then also embers went up over Lake Michigan into Michigan and burned portions of the northern lower peninsula where we are today. And so this always reminds me of Crow's message of, we need to respect Ishkode fire, and if we ignore it or if we misuse it, it could become harmful. And as a result of fire suppression, we've had a lot of biodiversity loss. We've had a lot of systems changing, and we've lost a lot of that indigenous culture and use of cultural fire. And so I'm going to kind of end with two different projects that Michigan Natural Features Inventory is working on in this area, two that I'm very excited to work on. So this first one is Setting the Straits on Fire. So this is a program that started last year, and it's through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Coastal Program. And so it's between MNFI, the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa, and also the University of Minnesota. And so we are going out into these areas of the Straits and going through and trying to identify some of these pine blueberry plains, as they're called. And so these were really important areas for blueberry harvesting. And so they were burned very frequently because people were aware of that relationship with blueberries and fire. And so after they picked all the blueberries, usually the last one out would strike a match or light a fire, and it would burn it for the next year. And so there's been a lot of lack of knowledge of this indigenous cultural burning that took place. And so this study is trying to look at how can we better manage these spaces knowing this history that hasn't been uncovered. And it's also very interesting that the distribution of red pine also occupies this area that the Anishinaabeg migrated. So it's just a very interesting relationship between people and the plants. And so what we're hoping to do out of this project is kind of collect a lot of this knowledge surrounding these fire regimes in these areas. We're going to do a few listening sessions with the Little Traverse Bay Band elders, and we're hopefully going to reconstruct this history and then also identify places that we could maybe have more cultural burns take place with the tribe. And so what we're doing is we're going out and doing field sampling, we're walking through these spaces, and then we're looking for trees that have this kind of slice, or cat face is what they're called. And there's one example right here. Maybe I'll move it. And so what we do is once we find them or find stumps of them, we will take cores of them so we can see how old the trees are. We'll go in and we'll count how many of these fire events occurred. And then we will take samples. We'll take slices of them, and then we'll take it back to the lab and count and see how many fire scars occurred. So on this tree, you can see it was born down here. There's a fire event at this year, It regrew, so red pine are super resilient to fire, and as a result, they will produce a bunch of resin, and they'll kind of scab over to prevent any like fungal infection or pest infection. So at every burn, they kind of do this healing overlap, and so then we can measure how many burns happened during that time. This is another example, and I have another example I'll pass out. And so the end product is something like this, which I'm still learning to interpret. But what it is every one of these red triangles is a fire that happened. And each of these long lines is the tree. And so you can see some of these trees had, upwards of 8 to 10 burns throughout its lifetime. And then you see kind of this abrupt stop of fire that happened. And so this was for Tony's Trail. Actually, more than Tony's Trail. So this was just after one season of collecting stumps. And so we'll take this information, we'll digest it, and then that'll inform the Little Traverse Bay Band of where they should burn and at what intervals they should burn. So another project we're working on, also kind of in line with this Straits project, is we're working on this statewide prescribed fire model. And so this is ultimately a tool for land managers, for people that manage state parks, state forests, to look at the landscape and learn how to prioritize where fire efforts should go. And so this is a project that started in 2021, and it's always ongoing and evolving. So the first renditions of this were focused on these state properties that we already had information on. As you can see, there's a lot up here. There's some down south. But our next round is hopefully going to be applied statewide, regardless of if it's state property or not. And so into this model is this complex formula of all these different things related to fire and fire history and in the site-specific level. And so mostly it's looking at the landscape, looking at the trees and the space present, and then looking at if there's any rare plants that are fire dependent, how do we manage those spaces? And so we have a paper out on it if you really want to get into the weeds. Otherwise, we do have a story map. It's a website that kind of brings you through the entire model, and it zones in on individual areas. So this is the northern lower peninsula, and so you can see within these state-managed lands a lot of different colors and a breakdown of what fire needs are on the landscape. So ideally, this is going to be a tool that land managers everywhere can kind of use to inform their land management. And with that, I think I'll wrap up. I do have some resources available to you. So if you want to learn more about the Anishinaabeg migration story, Mishomis is the book. The Good Fire podcast talks a lot about Indigenous fire throughout North America. And the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council and the Michigan Prescribed Fire Model is also available. Yeah, thank you.
Mary and I will also be sticking around to field any questions you may have. So. I'm gonna get the other one. So the question was, do we do our burns here locally? And when we do we replant or just let them let the nature decide what grows back? And so we do a combination of both is the answer. And yes, we do them locally. So like here, with the C4 unit that we burned, the 1 acre, what was there was the smooth brome, the invasive native species or non-native species that we have. And so we want to get rid of that, right? We don't want that to grow back. So our plan is to get rid of that by burning and then coming back right after that burn and planting native plugs that we grow in our greenhouse here, a lot of forbs and grasses, and then also reseeding it, hoping that those take hold, and we can then kind of monitor it over the next 3 to 5 years is about what the timing it takes for native plants to establish in those systems, especially after removing invasives. So that's kind of our, and then after planting and monitoring, our hope is then to potentially reburn that unit when it needs it.
We've got a parcel in Conservancy in Calcasieu County. It's 1,000 acres. And about 8 years ago, I did a 4-acre pollinator and whether the Conservancy is doing that type thing. No, you guys just get more. Is that something that's going to be available from the Conservancy?
Sure. The question was, this gentleman has 4 acres of pollinator habitat on his property over in Kalkaska County, and was wondering how he might go about burning that. And so currently we are not doing prescribed fire outside of our public lands that we own. But where I would lead you is the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council actually has resources available for private contractors that are available in Michigan. That would be a really helpful resource. That would be, actually, Mary, if you want to field that.
Yeah. So the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council, it's the fourth bullet point there. So on their website, they have a list of local fire contractors that people have worked with. So these are people that provide the service of going in and burning. And so a lot of times they will kind of do all the background information that Cody is doing by like looking at burn breaks, looking at any hazards around your property. If there's like a barn you don't want to burn. And so, yeah, they're a great resource. You can contact multiple of those people and get different ideas of pricing. There's also another exciting thing happening in Michigan. We have a Michigan Burn Manager program. Yeah, Certified Prescribed Burn Manager. So within the state, citizens have the right to burn their property. And so it was up to the Michigan DNR to create a pathway of creating a protocol that people can do this. And so it's been, 15, 20 years since they've been working on it, but they're coming out with it soon. And so this is kind of a way that individual property owners can get certified and go through the proper channels to burn their property. So ultimately, fire will hopefully be in the hands of more locals and be able to be done effectively and safely.
We've done a few programs with NRCS. Is that something you guys know about
NRCS, they will sometimes provide funding for burns. So if your land is enrolled in, it's the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they will sometimes assist in converting land to native pollinator habitat. And sometimes they do have a stipend of sorts to help you manage that property. And so I would recommend contacting your local county NRCS representative, and they will connect you with, maybe getting that paid for.
Yeah, and one thing to note on that is through any of those NRCS programs, oftentimes like a CSP or an EQIP grant, they do fund prescribed burns. That's actually one of the main tools that you are able to utilize, and they will totally fund that program as long as you have a burn plan in place and all the proper methods. It's called the Certified Prescribed Burn Manager Program. There's not a lot of information on it right now. They just put someone in that position in the DNR this last year, this last fall. So she's got a heavy load to carry, and she's working through that stuff. So I'm sure there will be more information out there soon.
Is there like a minimum acreage or size that a burn permit would cover? Like if you're burning a very small area, do you still need a permit?
Yes. In some way or fashion, if you're doing a prescribed fire, you definitely still need a burn plan. and then the proper permitting to go along with that from the DNR, again, being the fire authority in northern Michigan. That's what you'd need.
Fire in Michigan is very odd sometimes because in southern Michigan, where I am, it's less strict, and so a lot of the decisions are made by the local fire chief. Where I believe like northern Michigan, north of the tension line, it turns into like you need a blanket burn permit by the DNR. So yeah, there's a lot of nuances in fire. You know.
I was just going to say, as someone who's reached out and contacted the firms that can be hired, Cody, I think I mentioned this last week, that one thing that would be helpful for landowners is to aggregate the opportunity, because if you have small acreage, that you basically do a cost share with your neighbors. They need a minimum to come up to make it kind of worth their time and effort. And pretty much right now, it's downstate until we have more local resources. So I do think that there's a role to play in sort of like talking and advocating, because it can really like have an impact. You're not going to come up with 2 acres.
Yeah, that is a great comment. Yeah, you guys all need to get together and collaborate. Maybe start a Facebook page, you know?
Is there a certain goal in this week, minimum, maximum area to fire?
It does depend. So when I was working in Minnesota, we were pretty in a rural area, and the biggest burn I was on was like 12,000 acres. So that's about 26 square miles. And that was for a really large tract of land that the DNR in Minnesota owned, and they had very specific goals for that burn. I've also done burns as small as this room or, you know, little parking lot prairie. You still have to think about the same things of like, what are some of the hazards? What are your burn break barriers? What's the wind doing? What's the weather doing? So it's kind of the similar recipe, but it can be at a larger, smaller scale.
About the buffers that we saw on the map here, it's like a 5-foot buffer for like a relatively small burn. So for the big burn that we just went through, like is that buffer then a lot wider?
Yeah, there is kind of a tool that we use to measure like how wide your break should be. Generally, like I think about like a tall grass prairie, like sometimes those big blue stem plants are as tall as you. And so if you think about it, like if the wind were to push it all the way flat, like would it be able to jump that barrier? And so that's when we think about some forest systems. Usually trees don't catch on fire. But that's where like we kind of upscale or downscale depending on it. There's also different types of burn breaks. So sometimes we'll use like short mowed grass because that short grass is usually really wet from having moisture and growing, and it's unlikely that it will catch fire. And then hard breaks are like mineral soil that isn't flammable, or like pavement or things like that. So yeah, do you have anything to add?
Oftentimes, you can also use natural breaks to like rivers, streams. Unnatural would be like concrete parking lots. That could also be used as a burn break, as an artificial burn break. But yeah, they all work. And I think the general rule is, let me know if I'm wrong on this, but as far as the width of like the mowed line is usually like 3 to 4 times the max height of the vegetation you're burning. So again, coming back to what Mary said about like big blue stem coming over, you want it at least 3 times that just in case. So
Potentially, just I'm off on a tangent here, but I have thought, given how sandy our soils are, which I think is a unique aspect of this quality, and normally in New Hampshire, forests more oxygen, more air. Do fires burn hotter sort of in our area? Because you mentioned sort of low temps, like how low
I like this question because you're really thinking. And it's true, like different soils will impact the fuel. So if you think about like the leaves on top of the sandy soil, like say it rained today, that rain, like the time it takes for that water to dry up is going to be faster on sand as it will for like clay or other things like that. And so that's all these things that we have to consider when we're burning is like, you know, these blueberry plains systems, they might be drying out faster. And so when we're making our recommendations for like this fire prescription or this recipe of what they need to achieve in the weather, we do think about that. And so I was recently up in like Bay Mills and talking with the tribal fire crew that they have there, and they said like one of the ways they look at it is by the needles and like feeling if the needle, like if you squeeze it halfway and it snaps, it's too dry, and so they won't burn it. One way I do it is I just go out and I dig my hand down until I feel the soil, and then I pull it all up and I see how wet it is. And so if I see like the top 2 inches is pretty dry and the bottom 2 inches is pretty wet, then I can kind of adjust like, you know, how much of this do I want to burn? Do I want to burn all of it? If I do, then I'll wait until the whole thing is dry. Or sometimes you just want to keep some of that. And so you can kind of tailor it like that. It gets real specific, but I'm a nerd, so I really like it.
Yeah, totally. So you're talking about backing fires and head fires, or flanking fires even. So backing fires, again, are you're burning against the wind. So if you have a wind coming at my face, the idea would be to conduct a backing fire is lighting the fire on this side of the room and having it go against the wind. So it's going to have that really high residence time, and it's going to burn and consume all of the fuel as much as it can. As to where if you were to light a head fire, again, the wind coming from that direction hitting my face, you light there, that's going to be a head fire, and that's going to cruise right through, right? If you have a 15-mile-an-hour wind and like light grasses, it's going to not high consumption. You're not going to get that residence time, and it'll totally change your burn.
Yeah, and to that point, it's like kind of the behavior of fire is like another term we give it is fire behavior. And so there's this whole realm of fire science and people that measure the flame lengths of like how tall the fire is. And that's something like as you're a burn boss and you're leading the burn, you're like looking for these cues of like, is the wind changing? How is the fire moving? And so it's kind of like getting familiar with this being, this thing that's moving across the landscape. And so the more you see it, the more kind of familiar you are and like predictable it can be. So yeah, but all of that goes into the prescription and like where you're starting the burn and where you're going to end the burn. And sometimes when the wind changes a lot, like those days where it's kind of shifting, it's not the best day to burn. Usually the best days are when you have a consistent wind from one direction and it stays that way. That's when it goes most seamlessly.
So if I wanted, my burn objective was to do pest control, specifically to kill the ticks in a field or in my yard. Would I want to use a vacuum fire? Would it have a longer residence time?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. So the first thing I would say is like, when should you target the ticks? Like when in their biology are they up above the ground or not? So thinking about that time frame, and then thinking about like how hot does it have to be to kill a tick? That might change which way you decide to burn. But the safest thing to do is to do a backing fire where it kind of creeps into the wind and is hotter for longer. And it will also burn up a lot of their habitat that they're on, and so that'll kind of further limit how many ticks are present. Yeah, and Cody can probably add to this for northern Michigan, but usually it's a local DNR office. So they have offices throughout the state, and usually there's a person whose job it is to monitor the weather. And so, based on that person's experience and knowing the landscape and what flammable things they have, they will create, like, the green flag, yellow flag, red flag. And so, you're kind of at the mercy of their knowledge and experience to know if it's appropriate or not. But often, like, depending on the burns and the goals you have, like when I was in southern Michigan, we needed these very specific weather conditions that were also a little risky for other different types of fuels. So we were burning a forested unit that needed more wind, it needed hotter temperatures, and so we could put in a special request and still be able to burn. So it's kind of about relationships too.
On that note, is there like a correlation between Smokey Bear's fire dangers and like it also being illegal to burn?
I think so, yes. But I mean, there's always a scale there. So when sometimes it says high danger, it is true. It is too dangerous to burn. And it's interesting to think and look at these fire histories that we're recovering, because a lot of that community burning that they were doing annually was like right when the snow was off, they would burn it, which is like, it's still kind of wet. The weather's not super hot. It's like actually quite tame fire. So they were actually burning in lesser than ideal burn conditions, but was perfect for what they needed. So by burning and managing the fuels at a safe time, then you have less risk of wildfire when temperatures are extreme and there might be long droughts.
Given that I think collectively we've seen increasingly cultural traumas around fire, what would be your elevator pitch for saying to your neighbors, no, no, this one we got under control? Like, what's the elevator pitch for doing this in a moment when fire is not considered safe?
I can go after. I'll see what
I don't think either of us want to take this one, but it's tough, right? Trying to tell someone that you're going to set fire to the ground and it's going to be just fine is pretty wild. But I think you have to really let them know, like, the amount of planning and time it takes, like the amount of checking the weather. Like there's just so much that goes into burn plan. Like, it could go on for hours about it, but you're looking at like ISI, BUI, all of these indices that really tell you whether it's going to be a burn, like a really good burn day, or like today would be a pretty decent prescribed fire day. Like it'd be a pretty decent day to light a fire out there. Yeah, right. Yeah. But there's just, it's one of those things. I mean, I think the biggest obstacle that we have to overcome is the fire literacy, right? Like helping the community understand how important it is to start doing this again. It's something we haven't done in forever, but it's tough. Please feel free to add.
It's kind of like a knowledge is power thing. So, like, since we're talking about some of the big burns in like Los Angeles, like Palisades, that area is very fire dependent. It's very flammable. It hasn't had fire for a long time. And even the indigenous communities there knew that and told, people like, don't live there. It's very dangerous. And so I think it's also the responsibility of some of our legislators that are approving like where people build. We need to think about that, like when we choose to have a second home or somewhere, to think about that fire risk and then to appropriately manage for it. So, as people are spreading out and moving into these natural areas, it creates an issue for suppressing fire because there's a lot of value in those homes. And so that's why you see, the millions and billions of dollars that this big wildfire had caused. That's all human infrastructure. That's the cost. And so that's where the Palisades, it was probably really good ecologically for them to burn. But on the human side, it was really negative. So I'm always eager to defend fire. But yeah, I think that's where we need to have the responsibility to know how to protect our assets, and also to know and acknowledge that fire is a part of our world and our system, and it's unavoidable. So fire is the solution to fire in a way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good fire. Yeah. There's a lot of resources for landowners if you are concerned about fire danger around your house. Actually, there's a whole list of things that you can easily do to reduce any fire danger to your home, like mowing widths around your house, like where you store your firewood. Don't stack it up on your porch, stack it up, 30 feet away from your house. All those little things.
Yeah, the term you're referring to, or what you're referring to, is called mop up, is what we call it in the fire world. And so that's basically, yes, after the burn, the controlled burn is over with, the staff sticks around and makes sure the site is cold, which means there's no fire left, there's no smoldering. So that's part of the burn written into the burn plan. So that's something that is necessary after the burn. We'll go around with UTVs, with water tanks, and make sure everything is completely out before we leave the site. Sometimes it takes hours. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Yep.
One thing that helped me understand it was, Ken Mountain or Chaparral. There was no chaparral more than 70 years. So if you live in the place for 65 years, it's kind of a counterpoint. When you look at fires, is there a name for that? And if you think about Upper Manistee, are you going to look at what's the name for this? Like a fire cycle probability in time? And
Yeah.
the history of that.
I would call it the fire regime, which is, yes. And so every ecosystem kind of has its own fire regime. Like prairie burns every year to every 4 years-ish. Like some dry forests, like the Blueberry Plains, we're seeing maybe every 5 years to every 10 years. And so there's kind of this general window of what we know about them, how frequently they have to burn. And then in the absence of fire, there's a lot of evidence. If you have that kind of ecologist eye, we can see the hardwoods expanding, the composition or all the species are starting to change into things that love fire to being things that don't love fire being present. And so there's a lot of resources actually on the Michigan Natural Features Inventory website. If you know you have a dry mesic forest, we have a whole document on it that you can read about it and look at the plants that are present and all of those things. So It depends on which site it is. If it's a dry sand prairie, if it's kind of like a jack pine mixed forest, if it's a wetland, wetlands burn, and they have a different regime.
And is there a place you can find out the times of those?
Yeah, I think there might be a short list on the Michigan Prescribed Fire Model. If you look that up online, it'll show you the fire return interval is one term we use for it. Yeah, and then that'll tell you for a healthy system what it should be getting.
Another question. So today we use drip torches for igniting a prescribed burn, but like traditionally, what kinds of tools were used at those?
Yeah, that's one thing that I've always been interested in. And unfortunately, since there's been so much lost knowledge, I'm not totally sure as far as the Anishinaabeg, but I have heard of them using pitch sticks, which are usually like a pine that's very resinous and it has all of these flammable chemicals, and so it'll stay lit longer. Sometimes it's referred to as fat wood, that it's like the dead wood that just has so much resin. They're like great fire starters. So I've heard of them using that. I've heard of like bow drills where, you know, it's kind of, you see it on shows like Survivor and stuff where, you know, they're using this almost like a violin bow to start a fire. But yeah, within the Anishinaabe, like there are different types of fire. So like sacred fire is using a flint, which I learned recently. Whereas like some of the landscape fires, I think they were started with some of those other things like the bow drills and things like that.
And then I have a follow-up question, which is, if I found a really big patch of blueberries in the woods, how likely is it that that could have been associated with blueberry farming?
It's possible. So a lot of them that we're seeing are along the coastlines of the lakes, and it's kind of multifaceted of why they exist there. But the sand would like blow into the landscape and form these like inner dunes, and so blueberries love like sandy soil and having their feet wet. So they like the high water table of the lakeshore, and they like how dry it can be. They like the fire that happens, and so a lot of the Anishinaabe would, you know, travel by canoe and like hit these different spots. And so often we'll see patches of them like along the lake shores, and then sometimes internal, like, you know, a few miles in from the lakeshore. But yeah, usually like a lot of these more degraded blueberry plains systems we're seeing, the blueberries just aren't producing anymore. And it's like kind of sad, but they need that fire to kind of invigorate them. And then red pine, the tree, it also needs mineral soils for their seeds to fall onto. And if they don't have that mineral soil, they don't grow and reproduce. So it's like, yeah, these are fire dependent systems. Like they need it. Hopefully you guys can see a fire sometime.
That's the hope. Yep. Well, thank you everyone for staying around for questions, and thank you for coming today.